It's time for another episode of The Sean Tabbitt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Cheryl Chumley, and we're going to be discussing her brand new book, Lock Down: The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Cheryl, it is truly an honor. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Sean. I'm so delighted to be with you.
Now, Cheryl, I've been a big fan of your books and your work for quite a few years. However, I know some of the folks in my audience, this is actually the very first time that they are meeting you. So we're going to kick this off by having you share a little bit of the Cheryl Chumley origin story. For somebody who maybe isn't familiar with your work or who's meeting you for the first time, give them a little bit of context. What should they know about you?
Sure. Well, right now I am the online opinion editor at the Washington Times, where I also host a twice weekly podcast, Bold and Blunt, which is politics and culture from a Christian conservative perspective, similar to what you do here, Sean. So kudos to you for bringing forward that worldview. That's exactly what America needs. As for my bio, I'm married with 4 children. I was born and raised in Massachusetts. Savannah, Georgia is my home of heart. I'm an Army veteran. I'm also a licensed private investigator and have my own business with my husband. And I care deeply about the direction this country is taking.
Yes, it is. It's indeed a time for hard messages and hard conversations. And I feel like just things have slowed enough in culture right now. Not that there isn't a lot of crazy stuff going on, but I feel like people have enough brain space to hear some harder things and process a little bit more. Maybe they're a little less traumatized right now than they were 6 to 12 months ago. But in terms of, I guess the next place, kind of that story behind the book, your previous book was called Socialists Don't Sleep. How is this a follow-up or kind of the logical next step for you in your literary progression?
Well, the other half of that title, Socialists Don't Sleep, was Christians Must Rise or America Will Fall. And this book basically looks back on the last 2+ years of the coronavirus and shows how Americans were driven by fear, lacking completely in godly discernment, which is kind of a natural segue from why Christians need to rise up and take back this nation, get involved in some of the things that many Christians have been reluctant to involve themselves in recent years for whatever reason. But look, America is a nation built on the idea that rights come from God, not government. So the more secular this country grows, the more we remove God from the public platform, which just opens the void for government to come in and grab and seize individual liberties, which the last 2+ years of the coronavirus shows that's exactly what occurred.
And as a long-term publishing guy, I'm always curious about kind of that intentionality with which somebody opens a book. So in the opening part of your book, you talk about some firsthand experiences your family has had with medical doctors, experts saying they're sure of this, they're sure of that, but things don't always go the way the experts say they will go. I'm curious why you opened the book like that. I loved how that set the stage for where you would go later.
Thank you. Well, I was looking for a way to open the book that was an attention grabber, that would make people sit up and take note from a very layman's perspective. And look, every person, not just in America, but probably in the world, has been to a doctor or a dentist or a medical professional at some point in their life, or known someone, a family member or friend who has, and that medical professional has told them to do this. And then they find out that, oh, that medical profession was wrong. So there are so many examples in our own lives where we take our own medical and health issues and self-determine with them. But when it came to the coronavirus, we were letting Bill Gates, for crying out loud, tell us what to do. Bill Gates, the Microsoft guy, right? We were letting Anthony Fauci, the medical bureaucrat, tell us what to do. And if we just go back to that common sense idea of individual rights and personal accountability, we can really stop any type of liberty seizures that the government put on American citizens the last couple of years. We can stop that from happening again.
Yeah, it is a difficult place to be when we start listening to people who have no vested interest in our success, in our healing, or our well-being. It seems to be culturally we're following icons and certain people where like you have a platform, therefore I should listen to you. But that's not always the best path for any of us to take.
Absolutely. And which is why, if you look at all my books really, but this one too, if you go to the end, you can see where I footnote everything. And I always look for the most liberal of sources to cite from, because I know when I write a book like this or any of my books, I'm setting myself up to be attacked by the left. And I want to have their own words to showcase and throw back at them. So, look, in this country, it's either God-given liberties or government granted. And there really is no in between. You're either walking down the path toward one or walking down the path toward others. And, your audience could recognize that, certainly the logic of that, because you're either walking with God or you're drifting towards Satan. Well, what was the big driving factor with the coronavirus? Fear. What's fear a tool of? Satan. So, just look at things constantly from a Christian constitutional perspective, and everything falls neatly into place, what you as an individual should do to keep your liberties.
Yeah, it is an interesting season. It's a battle of identity. It's a battle of worldview. A lot of people fail to even realize they have a lens and a grid by which they view and understand the world. And you're seeing how much kind of that lack of a Judeo-Christian worldview plays into how people understand how they operate in the world. So one of the battle cries that we hear right now is that we need to crack down on dangerous speech. And as a marketing guy, I know that if I can control definitions of words and phrases and just, basically put these in front of you over and over again to enough where you just accept them, and I feel like that's what we're seeing all throughout news and media, social media right now. So when we hear the left saying dangerous speech, what are they talking about? Whose dangerous speech are we supposed to be concerned about? Because I feel like what I think is dangerous speech and what they think is dangerous speech, two totally different things.
Well, really, what founding fathers thought of as dangerous speech is what should be the issue here. And the fact is, founding fathers didn't carve out exemptions for government to control what they deemed dangerous speech, because that's not part of the Constitution. So this whole idea of dangerous speech has been a slow morphing of the left to really take over the First Amendment and crack down on speech that they see as either offensive or conflicting with their political ambition. So really under the coronavirus, this is really ramped up. It used to be 20 years ago, they talked about things called hate speech. And I thought at the time that was a slippery slope, which here we are now, 2 years of the coronavirus, and you have the left calling out dangerous speech, disinformation, misinformation. And they're making the case that when you put forward ideas that aren't in line with what the government has stamped as approved speech, that it is dangerous speech and it is killing people, because those who have questions about, say, the coronavirus shots or about the sound science behind the face masking, those people, the left say, are guilty of dangerous speech that leads to other people being put in the hospital or even killed from the coronavirus. So we need to really pay attention to how the left is stripping our First Amendment and the spirit of free speech that is part and parcel of even the free market of America.
Yeah, the kind of that phrase dangerous speech is the pathway to censorship. And as you talk about throughout the book, there's a lot of intent that third parties, be it businesses or news media organizations, other people besides the government, are going to be the ones enforcing and cracking down and censoring that speech. So the government doesn't have to do that, but you can be a useful tool for them to make that happen. Kind of related to speech, there's also been this massive move to redefine the word patriotism. And for me, in that section of the book, I was surprised to learn that I'm a person of concern, because you talk about how even like evangelical Christians and Catholics are being likened to white nationalists or members of the KKK. I think a lot of evangelicals and Catholics would be surprised that we're all being kind of put under that same umbrella.
Yeah, the word patriot and patriotism has been redefined by the left right now, by the Democrat Party, by globalists and collectivists and so forth, because what they're trying to do is make it seem as if you're a patriot in America, a patriotic American citizen, that you would automatically take the vaccine, the coronavirus shots, because you care as an American citizen, as a good patriotic American citizen, you care about the damage that you could cause others in the country by not taking that shot. So if you have concerns about the shot, that's really unpatriotic because you're not helping out your neighbors, you're putting them at risk. And the very slippery, sly, snaky type of mindset shift that brings about is that here in America, once again, it's God-given individualism that is the core of our exceptionalism. What the left wants to do is usher in a big government, globalist, collectivist approach where you do in your life what the government wants you to do for the greater good of society. And there's a very fine line between doing things for the good of others based on, say, Christian teaching and biblical principles, and doing what's good for society based on what government wants you to do, either by guilt or shame or dictate.
Yeah, it is a weird slippery slope when it comes to personal responsibility, taking care of yourself. If I'm, like what's the limit? If I'm responsible for not only myself, but everybody else, it's kind of like if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. It's just kind of a confusing mess to know who's in charge of what. One of the things I've noticed the past couple of years is I feel like the move is just to push things as far as you can in different segments and different sectors of society. For those of us who have kids who are in college, we've seen a lot of interesting things, but I think for folks who are a bit disconnected from that season of life in terms of their family situation, they might have no idea of the crazy that's been taking place on our campuses. What have we seen there the last couple of years related to enforcement, everything related to the coronavirus?
Yeah, this hits home for me. And I also did research that shows that it hits home for a lot of parents in America. So when the coronavirus broke, my son was a senior in high school, and he got robbed of his senior graduation because, of course, nobody could gather for a graduation. And then he went on to college, James Madison University in Virginia, where we live, and he got robbed of his college experience because what happened after 2 weeks of college, because of the government orders and dictates and so forth and so on, he got forced into his room along with every other student on college campus, doing classes online from the laptop. And did they get a refund on, some of their college tuition? No, of course not. You had to fight for that. And even then you don't get it. So my son, what he decided to do was that the college experience was, it wasn't worth the money that had to go to pay for him. So he stayed home and he took community college where for a fraction of the price, he does remote learning on his laptop in his room, but where he can work full time. So that's all to say. Meanwhile, around the nation, this same scenario was being played out on, hundreds of colleges and universities around the nation. And what's worse is, as a condition for these students returning to school, even now, they have to do things like sign promises that say that they will social distance at all times, that they won't attend parties of more than, or gatherings of more than 10 people. I don't know why 10. I don't know why not 9 or 11. There's no science behind that. But they also have to pledge in some schools to wear face masks when they are in certain gatherings. And worse, and this is the big danger, Sean, because it's where the left wants to take this coronavirus ultimately. A lot of students, JMU included, have to download an app to their phone where where it's a contact tracing app. And so what it does is it puts the school administrators in charge of alerting whenever one student who's tested positive for coronavirus comes within, say, 6 feet or 10 feet or whatever random number they choose that day of another student who's not tested positive. And so you can, the one who's not tested positive gets a ping on his or her phone saying, oh, alert, you've just come in contact with somebody who's tested positive. And where this leads ultimately is where Congress, and there's a bill in Congress for $100 billion of technology-based contact tracing, it leads us all down a path of being sort of like China, where we get the government stamp of approval to travel freely or to enter this restaurant or to go to that movie theater. So contact tracing, it's at the college level now, and most students are being conditioned to believe that this is the way to live, and it's only going to spread across America like wildfire if we don't put a stop to it.
One comment I'll throw out too, in terms of kind of conditioning us to be used to contract tracing, almost like you said, it kind of seems like this is a Chinese scenario in terms of what they're trying to play out in culture. Sounds like something that might have come out of 1984 if you will. But before I got into publishing, I had this whole long tech and software industry career. And you raise this concern in the book. What happens with that data? So we start collecting all this data on everybody at a college or everybody in a city or in a state or in the whole country. Just the privacy issues alone and the potential mining and harvesting of that data. I mean, that's almost more concerning to me than the actual kind of the contact tracing up front.
Yeah, it is. And whenever there's data, right? Whenever data is involved with something, technology, you have to ask yourself the questions: who has access to the data? Who's collecting the data? And who are they sharing the data with? And, it's always the government who's got its fingers in data somehow. And if you even dismiss the idea of being hacked, which we shouldn't, because just read the headlines, it seems like every week some major organization from Bank of America to the Veterans Administration are being hacked, right? But even if you were to dismiss that, you have to look just a little way down the road and question who is using this data and for what reasons. And when it comes to contact tracing and data that the government can collect on you, I can tell you where it leads. If you go to, say, a therapist, right, and you don't want anyone to know about that, well, contact tracing can ping your location. So somebody somewhere, and this is frightening, you may not know who, would know where you went that day. Or say you visit a bar every day after work, for a 5 o'clock happy hour drink. Maybe you don't want people to know your business. Or how about this? You go to Planned Parenthood to have an abortion. Now, that's all personal, private information. You may be against abortion. Of course, I am as well. But I'm not against the idea of somebody having personal, private reasons to visit doctors. And I have no business, neither do you, of knowing those personal, private reasons. So this is where the data-based contact tracing and data collection could lead in America.
Well, and I would say too, I mean, this is just one additional extension of what's already happening. I mean, just because we carry our smartphones with us everywhere we go, and with the amount of data that our cell phone companies and all the apps are collecting on us and what they do with that data, I think a lot of us don't really know. We're already in the midst of people harvesting our data for those sorts of things. In terms of the face masks, I'd be curious to hear, like, what's been most concerning to you in terms of, and I'm thinking more from, what is this doing to us, conditioning us unto culturally? Because it's one thing to say, wear this to try to protect yourself from a disease. It's another thing to use it as socially a badge of compliance or an easy way to identify who's not. I mean, there's so much more going into the issues with the mask that go beyond trying to protect yourself from an illness.
Yeah, and I got to be upfront. I hate the face masking.
We all do.
Hated it. I've hated it from the start, and not simply because it's uncomfortable to wear. I hate the idea behind the face masking. First off, there are all kinds of studies out there showing face masks work, and I put the word "work" in air quotes because you have to question, what does that mean, work? Because over the months and now over the years, the definition of face mask work has changed significantly. We were told that they stop the spread of the coronavirus. We were told that they keep us safe from catching the coronavirus from other people. And then we were told ridiculous things like they stop the larger droplets, as if there was an epidemic of people walking around in America just spitting randomly all the time, right? So it's ridiculous on that. Second off, the studies that show that they work are largely conducted in labs. We don't live in a lab, okay? We are not, we're not for the petri dish for the bureaucrats, the medical bureaucrats of America. We live in the real life. And even if face masks worked as they define that they worked, you have to question the idea of how most people use the face masks. They would stuff them in their pocket. They would stuff them in their pocketbook. They would throw them in their glove box in the car, and then they'd whip them out to go into a store. And then they'd go into a restaurant. They'd wear a face mask from the entryway of the restaurant to the table, but then they could take down the face mask, as if the coronavirus doesn't float around the table, only at the entryway points. The worst, though, was when you went into doctors or orthodontist office like I had to, and they would want you to wear the face mask in the waiting room, even though there were no people in the waiting room because they wouldn't allow it. And then as soon as you got back to the chair, you could take the face mask off, as if the coronavirus didn't enter that particular area of air. So the thing with the face mask is you have to ask why. Why does the government keep pushing these? And when you look at it, this is this stems from China and Asia, and it's more about doing what is seen as best for your neighbor. It's more about showing concern for your neighbor than it is about any truth or reality or science-based fact in terms of protecting your own health. And the worst offenders of face mask wearing to me have been those people who know how silly and non-logical it is to wear the face mask, but they did it because they wanted to get along. They went along to get along with others. And that's why we have a generation now growing up of children in schools who wear face masks at the bus stop in open air, and they think that this is the way that they should go. They think this is proper and normal. And I'm saying, I don't see the face mask going away because the younger generation has already been cowed into believing that the government knows best on this.
Well, and like anything else, give me an inch and I'll take a mile. It to me, it seems like it's just a breaking down psychologically. It's like, all right, you did this for the greater good. Now we're going to have, things are bad. We got to ask you for that one more, just that next thing. You want to protect your neighbor. It's almost always onto something else. In terms of words that got thrown around a lot this past year, talk to us a little bit about some of the ground you cover related to the Great Reset. A year or two ago, you started talking about that too much. You were told it was conspiracy theories. And now you're seeing even some of our folks on the world stage, politicians, saying the quiet parts out loud and using the phrase Great Reset when they're giving speeches. What suddenly changed?
Well, what's changed is they can't deny that it's out there and that it's real, which they never could, because if you went to the World Economic Forum's website, they have the Great Reset written all over their website as their agenda. They come right out and in various commentaries and opinion pieces and analyses talk about how the coronavirus is giving them this amazing platform to bring about the Great Reset. So in short, what the Great Reset does, and it's angled at America because we're kind of the last wall on this, it changes the direction of capitalism. It changes economies so that it puts a more communist type control on the free market. And it does it in the way of, right now in America, what we have in corporations is you have concern for the shareholders, right? You have a shareholder capitalistic system where the idea of a business is to make money, generate income, and to give the shareholders profits. Well, what the Great Reset is it removes shareholder capitalism and puts in its place what's called stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholders are defined as anybody with interest in that corporation, which could be Black Lives Matter, which could be a climate change group, which could be any number of any types of special interests, individuals, organizations, nonprofits, or what have you, even from politicians to education and union people. It's a wide swath of people who could say they have concern in a corporation's direction. And it puts in place the idea that corporations aren't in business to make money so much as to do their social justice duty so as to make all their stakeholders happy, which is why you have so many woke corporations in America now. These things aren't coming out of the blue. It's part of a greater design, all under the umbrella of the Great Reset.
Well, on that note, where we've talked about a bunch of doom and gloom, and again, this is a sobering book to read. I really enjoyed it. It's very thorough, but we're walking through difficult times. So it's a time for difficult conversations. It's a time for thinking deep and really looking forward to what's the best path ahead. So from your perspective, just marinating on this as you were putting the book together, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? I feel like we're on the precipice of either something really great or something really awful happening as culture keeps moving forward. I'm curious, are you glass half empty or half full?
It depends on the day, honestly. No, I'm serious. You hit on a good point when you say you have this feeling we're on the verge of something tipping. And I think a lot of Americans know that. They kind of feel that something's different now about what's happening in America, and that even the next election may not bring the solutions we need for what ails America. And they're right on that. We're right at a crossroads in America Are we going to be a nation of individualism, or are we going to just cave and do what the global powers want us to do and just fold our sovereignty? And so when you ask if I'm optimistic or pessimistic, I have to say I'm optimistic because I believe in God, and all Christians ought to be optimistic. But when it comes to looking at matters through worldly eyes, looking at what's happening in the political world, I'm very pessimistic because I don't see enough Christians. I don't see enough of those of faith getting up and getting involved and realizing that this is the 12th hour in America, and there's no time to just go about business as normal.
Well, and the thing that I keep thinking about every day when I turn on the computer and check the news in the morning is we are indeed in dynamic times. I feel like everything's just shifting every single day. Since you wrote the book, and again, a book gets contracted, it comes out anywhere from 12 to 24 months after it was contracted. Often a book can be 12 months out from when a manuscript was completed. So a lot can change in the landscape. Just the past couple of weeks, we've now I get to fly for the first time tomorrow without a mask. Will it last? We'll see what happens as government tries to figure out what they want to do with that. Elon Musk may buy Twitter, which could interestingly impact at least some of the speech that's happening on Twitter. So as you survey kind of the landscape out in front of us right now, anything you would add if the book were coming out, say, next week or next month?
Well, of course, there's been a continuation of what I've already written about, but there's nothing in my book that I've said that isn't coming true as we speak. And so what I would like people to get from this book is a look ahead at what the bigger fights are, which I do lay out, because I don't want people to be surprised when government doesn't just roll back times to pre-pandemic levels and we all get our individual freedoms back. It's not going to happen unless we fight for it.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the oddly, I say blessings, I feel like, for the church over the past 2 years, especially here in the United States. We had to be challenged with what it looks like to walk out our faith, many of us for the first time ever. Am I going to stand for something? If somebody tells me my worldview should be this, but I know this is completely antithetical to what I've been taught throughout all of my life as a Christian, we've had to wrestle with some of these things for the first time, which I think is indeed a very healthy thing. Cheryl, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out more about the book, all the things, where do we discover your work on the web?
Of course, at WashingtonTimes.com. I write there daily, and my podcast is there. You can go to Spotify and all the podcast places and download Bold and Blunt there. But I have a website, CherylChumley.com. You can find my work there as well.
And like we do with every episode, we'll make it easy. We'll have links in the show notes to Cheryl's website, her podcast, places where you can buy the book, all the things. So we'll make it easy, have it right there for you to click on through. It's time to bring this episode of the Sean Tabbitt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Cheryl Chumley. Once again, our book today was Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. And Cheryl, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Sean. God bless.